Hello, everyone, and welcome to the September National Heritage Area Best Practices Call. Today, we are going to be talking about pollinator partnerships, and we have 3 national heritage areas that are going to kick off the discussion. We'll be talking to people from Freedom Frontier National Heritage Area, Housatonic National Heritage Area, and MotorCities National Heritage Area. And to start off with, we are going to have Holly Zane from Freedom's Frontier share about what wonderful work they have been doing. Holly?
Let me get this up so it shows for you all. And hopefully you can see. Can everybody see my screen? I just want to make sure technology has not always been my friend today.
Yeah, we can see it, Holly.
Well, thank you all for allowing me to come here to talk a little bit about Freedom's Frontier. I'm the Associate Director. I'm also a Wyandotte Tribal member. My name is Wakon Rasatata, which means she who extends her paw. Our major themes are the settlement of the frontier, the border civil wars on the Western frontier, and the enduring struggle for freedom. And we have one of the largest national heritage areas. We have over 300 museums, historical societies, and historic sites that partner with us that you can visit in our area. And our boundaries include 3 million people and over 30,000 square miles along the Kansas-Missouri border. So that leaves a lot of territory where pollinator plantings and gardens can reside. I want to give a little background before I talk specifically about the pollinator event that you've been asked for me to talk about. But following the death of George Floyd in 2020, Freedom's Frontier invited our partners to submit grant applications for programming that would engage a broad section of the community in discussion about racial and social justice themes, i.e. the enduring struggle for freedom. And we gave out grants in the amount of anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000. And one of our recipients who did receive $5,000 from us was the Quindaro Underground Railroad Museum, who held an Emancipation Day of Service, Reconciliation, and Courageous Conversations in April of 2021. And they had 3 components, main components. One was community discussion and online readings by librarians to students of all ages on racial and social justice, hoping to develop solutions to crime, inequity, and racism. They also held a memorial ceremony laying wreaths for freedom seekers who made it to freedom in Quindaro in the 1850s and 1860s, and laying single red roses for those that died crossing the Missouri River seeking freedom. But they also created an underground railroad community garden. And the purpose they laid out was to have a place for individuals to travel to and to reflect on how far we have come as a society, and to envision a society of peace and healing and unity for all diverse cultures. The unique area that the garden was developed in is, first, it was located at the Vernon School, which was a segregated elementary school in Quindaro, and Quindaro is in the community of Kansas City, Kansas. The Underground Railroad Museum was established on land formerly occupied also by Western University, which was the first African-American college west of the Mississippi River, which was established in the 1860s, but had to close its doors in the 1940s due to lack of funds. The same land that the garden was established on was also the former home of the segregated Douglas Hospital, which was started by area African-American nurses and doctors. And it was also, the garden was placed above the Quindaro Township ruins, which was the largest underground railroad site in the U.S. before and during the Civil War, the only free port into Kansas for those that wanted slavery abolished, and it was established by my tribe, the Wyandotte Indians, white abolitionists from New England, freedmen and suffragettes. So it was a very unique site for the garden to be established. The garden was created by a diverse group during that emancipation event, including members of my tribe, members of the Quindaro African American community, and with a lot of assistance from members of the Kansas City Water Garden Club, who provided manpower and supplies, and they transported in these extremely huge blocks of rocks as benches and as stone planting boxes. After we had that event, Freedom's Frontier decided to take a role in protecting pollinators and their habitat and educating others about the importance of pollinators. But that was after we determined that supporting pollinators were consistent with our themes, which is a requirement of our plan. And that includes the settlement of the frontier, which includes returning the prairie to its natural state, to which it was when settlers first made their way to Western Missouri and Eastern Kansas, and also consistent with the theme of the enduring struggle for freedom, recognizing the role in history that agriculture has played in the identity and culture and ceremonies of Indigenous peoples, including my tribe, who were known for being the farmers of the North and the Three Sisters form of gardening. We signed a pollinator pledge with Freedom's Frontier, and we believe that these efforts will help ensure that those traditions of my tribe will be able to continue with the support of pollinators, their habitat, and conservation. So during Pollinator Week of 2021, which is just 2 months after the garden in Quindaro was established, we were given the opportunity to be the first national heritage area to sign a pollinator resolution with a pollinator district. And we chose Pollinator District 5710, which extends from Western Missouri to the center of Kansas, which is Manhattan, Kansas. And because of the significance of the Underground Railroad community garden and what it signified and where it's located in Quindaro and its very rich history, we decided to return to that garden for the signing ceremony. We also decided to host a pollinator event at the signing ceremony. We applied to Monarch Watch for a grant of milkweed samplings, so that the signing ceremony would include a planting event. And we're so blessed that the Monarch Watch and its founder, Chip Taylor, who is an icon to anybody involved in pollinators, they're located on the campus of the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas, which is where we're headquartered. Monarch Watch is a great resource both for education and for supplying milkweed seeds. They can supply hundreds and even thousands for any location in the United States. They also hatch monarchs on site. Students end up doing that on a regular basis. We were given 4 different kinds of milkweed seeds to choose from, or seedlings. They don't recommend seeds, they recommend plants. The plants are more likely to survive. And the reason I chose common purple milkweed, number one is purple sacred to my tribe. It's representative of wampum, but it's also a symbol of peace and pride, which I think is what the Quindaro community is all about, and the events that were held 2 months previous to this signing ceremony. I've also been told that monarchs are particularly attracted to bright or dark colors, that it's easier for them to find them in the dark, and they feed on them and also lay their eggs. So Quindaro is a Wyandotte word that means bundle of sticks. You can break a single stick, but if you have a bundle, they're strong. And what it really means simply is strength through unity. And that, with that theme, we ensured that a diverse group were participants in the signing ceremony and the planting event. Those that attended included Rotarians from all over Kansas and Missouri, Freedom's Frontier staff and trustees, African American citizens of Quindaro, Kansas, which is located in Kansas City, Kansas, abutting the Missouri River, and officers and tribal members of my tribe, the Wyandotte Nation of Kansas. And the participants ranged from age 9 to 85, and they planted the milkweed seedlings. They had the signing event, and everything was broadcast live through social media, nationally and internationally, to educators, because the author of the grant that we provided 2 months earlier is an educator in Kansas City, Kansas, America Patton. So the principal chief of my tribe, she also brought additional plants, those that are particularly sacred to my tribe, and they too attract pollinators. She had fun planting those and educating attendees on our traditions and how important the pollinators are for both medicines for us and all for our agricultural purposes. So also our second chief was present, our secretary, and many children from our tribe. Here are some additional images from the plantings and from the ceremony. This was also one of the few events that Jim Ogle, Freedom Frontiers National Heritage Area's executive director, was able to attend during his 1.5-year fight with 2 kinds of cancer. He was a Rotarian for many, many, many years in Topeka, which is part of District 5710, the district that we signed the resolution with. And he willed himself, even though he was very ill at that time, to make it to the event and sign the resolution. And unfortunately, as a lot of you know, he lost his fight with cancer in March of this year, approximately 9 months after the signing of the resolution. So I'd like to say this presentation is dedicated to Jim's memory and his love of pollinators, and wanting to make sure that they were protected, and that we had, as Freedom's Frontier, a role in that. We continue to collect pollinator pledges from our partners and to educate them on the importance of having pollinator habitats and how it relates to our themes. And we've included the logo of Rotary District 5710 on our pollinator pledge form. And of course, this Saturday, we're intending to sign a pollinator resolution with 4 other districts in Kansas City at Union Station with the president of the International Rotary Association. So it looks like we'll be adding some additional logos to our form. Here's my contact information, and although I'm not a Rotarian at present, I do act as an ambassador through Chris Stein, and in order to promote pollinator habitat and conservation, and I do so also as a member of my tribe.
Thanks, Holly. Vivian, you're up next. Give me a second to get your PowerPoint up. And now we're going to hear from Upper Housatonic Valley National Heritage Area. But let me. All right, can everybody see it? All right, Vivian, you're up, and just tell me when to advance the slides. Vivian, you need to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you.
Here you go. Now you can take it away.
Now can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Finally. It's great to meet you all via Zoom. Thank you, Katie and Heather, for inviting me to share this update about Housatonic Heritage Operation Pollination. The Upper Housatonic Valley National Heritage Area, the region covers about 1,000 square miles. I guess that's 1/30,000th of Holly's National Heritage Area in the Housatonic River watershed as it winds its way through mostly rural Southwest Massachusetts and Northwest Connecticut. Next slide, please. Operation Pollination was officially founded as a national initiative in 2018 by Chris Stein, the National Park Service's Chief of National Heritage Areas and Large Landscape Initiatives for several Midwestern regions, including Holly's. This groundbreaking program has been focusing on national heritage areas and community partners such as Rotary districts and Rotary clubs. The aim is to recruit a diverse array of organizational partners to engage in pollinator habitat restoration and education activities. Next slide, please. Inspired by Chris Stein's collaboration with national heritage areas in the Midwest, Executive Director Dan Bolignani launched the Housatonic Heritage Operation Pollination program. Our first major effort in late 2019 was engaging 40 community leaders at the Operation Pollination Summit. Summit participants were guided through the appreciative inquiry process. This is an energizing whole systems interactive method that builds on participants sharing their own positive skills and experiences, and I highly recommend it. The consensus of Summit participants, we met for about 6 hours, was that Housatonic Heritage Operation Pollination should forge community partnerships to prioritize pollinator-related education. By early 2020, Summit participants had signed 22 pollinator pledges before COVID-19 changed everything. Next slide, please. Before the pandemic shutdown, complete shutdown, our first educational event was in collaboration with the Berkshire International Film Festival and also with Bard College in Great Barrington and Peter Nelson, director of an award-winning documentary titled The Pollinators. We attracted a turnout of 200 pollinator enthusiasts to the film on Super Bowl Sunday in 2020. And we also assisted students later at a local high school film program to produce their own short pollinator documentary. Then all plans were sidelined by COVID. Next slide, please. As a result, we worked to create a relatively COVID-proof, mostly online education program in partnership with the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, known as OLLI, at Berkshire Community College. The course was titled Honoring Our Indigenous Heritage, Native People, Plants, Pollinators, and 47 people enrolled in the course. The inspiration for this course was the following question. As we face contemporary crises ranging from climate disruption and pollinator extinction, what can we learn from the experiences of Indigenous people who lived and thrived here for thousands of years? Next slide, please. Creating this course benefited from Housatonic Heritage's longtime connections to Berkshire Community College, as well as to two of our own programs, Operation Pollination and the Native American Heritage Trail. The trail was developed in collaboration with the Stockbridge-Munsee Community Band of Mohican Indians. The Stockbridge-Munsee community is the only federally recognized tribe with ancestral homelands in our region. Next slide, please. Our region was a home of the Mohicans, and there were other Indigenous people who came during certain periods too, and this is over thousands of years. But due to their forced displacement in the late 18th century, the tribe had to leave, and they've been living in Wisconsin since the mid-19th century. Next slide, please. The first presentation in this course on honoring our Indigenous heritage took place on June 3rd, just a couple of months ago. and it was led by Professor Margaret Bruchac. Dr. Bruchac serves as an associate professor of anthropology and coordinator of Native American and Indigenous studies at the University of Pennsylvania. She is of Abenaki descent and presented her research on 19th century Indigenous healers. She discussed her previous living history performances as an Indian doctress at Old Sturbridge Village Historic Site. And the photo on the screen is Dr. Bruchac in costume as an Indian doctress explaining one of the medicinal plants. Next slide, please. Dr. Bruchac's presentation provided historical and botanical insights. One example was Joe Pye weed, named after a Mohican healer. The plant blooms in late summer and early fall, about the time that typhoid fevers were prevalent, and native healers showed how well this plant medicine relieved those specific illness symptoms and was highly regarded and sought by both the colonists and as well as, of course, the indigenous Mohicans. Next slide, please. Wild edibles expert Russ Cohen presented at the next class, which was on June 10th, and with expertise in land use planning, natural resources, and law, Russ worked professionally for many years as river advocate for the state of Massachusetts. But wild edibles are Russ's avocation, and he's been leading wild edible talks and walks for more than 45 years since he was a teenager. His presentation connected edible plants with their use as food and medicine by indigenous people in this region. Next slide, please. On Thursday, September 15th, just last week, Russ also led an in-person wild edibles walk on the grounds of Bidwell House Museum in Monterey in Berkshire County. Next slide, please. Misty Cook grew up on the Stockbridge-Muncie Community Reservation in Wisconsin and served as their Director of Education and Cultural Affairs. Misty was certified as a tribal medicine woman due to her work tracing oral history, field work, and experiences with traditional native medicinal plants as documented in her book called Medicine Generations. Next slide, please. On June 17th, Misty presented to this course that I organized. She paid homage to her ancestors and to community elders who mentored her for many years as she learned about traditional Mohican plant medicines. Next slide, please. On June 18th and 19th, Misty presented a medicine walk at the Mission House Museum in Stockbridge. Next slide, please. To celebrate National Pollinator Week in June, Housatonic Heritage and OLLI partnered with the Massachusetts Pollinator Network to offer the final class in the course free of charge, and 82 people registered for that June 24th class. Next slide, please. The guest presenter was Evan Abramson, founder and principal of Landscape Interactions. Evan co-authored the Great Barrington Pollinator Action Plan, which I was also involved in, and authored plans for the towns of Lincoln and Egremont. Since 2019, Evan has designed more than 300 acres of pollinator habitat creation in the Northeast. Next slide, please. In the fall of 2020 in Egremont, Evan designed and led a community team in installing the Egremont pollinator pathway at the town park. Online, there is through his website, there's access to his written plan. Next slide, please. The Honoring Our Indigenous Heritage, Native People, Plants, and Pollinator course received encouraging course evaluations. More than 95% of respondents either strongly agreed or agreed that, quote, I would recommend this course to others. Some requested more courses about pollinators, which we hope to offer in 2023, continuing our cooperation with OLLI at Berkshire Community College. Next slide, please. Turning our attention beyond our region, Operation Pollination attained international reach first in 2021, when Rotary clubs in England, Scotland, Wales, India, and Mexico, along with the US, signed Operation Pollination resolutions. Next slide, please. In southern New England, several Rotary districts and national heritage areas came together to sign pollinator resolutions. In Massachusetts, they ranged from the Essex National Heritage Area on the northeast coast of Massachusetts to the Housatonic Heritage, which is in Berkshire County on the western border with New York State. Next slide, please. As you can see on the map, Rotary District 7890 covers many areas in western Massachusetts and northwest Connecticut, some of which overlap with Housatonic Heritage region. On July 15th at Egremont's Pollinator Pathway, which you saw being planted by the community group under direction of Evan Abramson in a previous slide. So at that site, which is now, was planted about 2 years ago and is now growing out, Rotary District Governor Randy Chappell signed our pollinator resolution with Housatonic Heritage Executive Director Dan Bolignani. There's a photo of both of them in the field. Next slide, please. After signing the resolution, we asked, what's next? How can we collaborate with Rotary clubs as well as with other partner organizations in our communities? In response to our query, Chris Stein developed a pollinator project matrix. The matrix evaluates 23 listed project ideas and on a scale, evaluating them on a scale of 1 to 5, according to the amount of effort required to do the project, the extent of volunteers needed, the cost of the project, how big does the planning time window have to be in order to get the project launched, and the actual time to do the project and continue it, and its impact in the community. Next slide, please. On August 4th, Dan Bolignani and I met with leaders from several other national heritage areas, including Holly and including Bonnie, who are on this call. We all have worked previously with Chris Stein in order to consider potential activities. And we agreed to share and to continue to develop ideas for activities suggested in the Operation Pollination Pollinator Project Matrix. If all goes well, we can report back to you on these projects later in 2023. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. That's wonderful. And as a reminder, everyone, we're going to take questions at the end. So now I'm going to turn it over to the MotorCities team. All three of them, I think, are going to speak. So we're going to hear from Sean and Brian and Bob.
Thank you, Heather. And wow, what great and inspirational stuff our colleagues are doing. It's really nice to hear about it, everybody. So MotorCities National Heritage Area, I think we were just looking it up, in 2018 had our first pollinator event, which we unveiled and talked about in 2019 when we hosted the Alliance of National Heritage Areas in the spring of 2019. So we're going to just focus on what we have done since then, but our pollinator pledge, as well as the signers of the pollinator pledge, can be found on our website. But today we're going to talk about, well, we'll go back to the pandemic too. And I believe our next event, and that we want to talk about. Well, no, yeah, it was pandemic. So in October of 20, we opened a pocket park that we had been working on for years that many of you have heard about, commemorating the 1932 Hunger March, which was a watershed moment in the formation of the United Auto Workers. And in the development of that park, which was a broad-based community effort for which we were the fiscal agents, we ended up with a perfect place to do some pollinator plantings on Pollinator Day in 21. So I believe that is what we're first going to look at here, and Brian's going to take you through those particular pieces. I just wanted to say, you know, we're known as an industrial. We commemorate and preserve the history of the automobile. It's very industrial. It's headquartered in Detroit. Most of our area is built up, large cities, large metropolitan areas, and surprisingly, there are a lot of broad landscapes among our partners that have quite a lot of ability to participate in the pollinator pledge, the plantings, etc. And we found a lot of enthusiasm for that, as well as it helps us to do the focus on natural resources portion of being associated with the National Park Service, recreation and preservation of the land. So while it was a reach before, the pollinators have actually given us an avenue to realize some different goals in those areas. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Brian.
Sure, thanks, Sean. So a few of the slides you've already seen kind of exhibit that partnership that Sean is talking about. You see volunteers from the DTE, which is our local major energy supplier, and the day that we're talking about was supported and partnered with the Wildlife Habitat Council. So they were working with them to actually provide the plantings for that day. So we were happy to be working with them. Marathon Petroleum, which we talk about some of those unlikely partners. So this is a huge oil refinery that is right next to the park. However, they have made their commitment to redeveloping that space. In fact, they are the certified wildlife habitat that we're partnering with. And so they were handing out pollinator plants to community partners and seed packs and all those sort of good things to the folks that were attending the event. Of course, Sean and I were able to speak, as well as some other partners, University of Michigan, Dearborn, Marathon Petroleum, and to the far right of your screen, Bees in the D, which is a logical name for those who support pollinator and apiary work in Detroit. So they are constantly working on ways to develop big and small habitats and support this sort of discussion. And you can see the footprint that we were planning in. This is the edge of the park that Sean is describing that we installed, and the pollinator planting occurred in sort of this catch basin there to provide natural irrigation of water and runoff back into the Rouge River, which is in the background. So it's solving a huge environmental issue while also supporting programming at the park. And actually, Bob, our communications manager, is here to share with you, I guess, an interesting twist on all of these pollinator projects is that they provide great support in media. So Bob, talk about how we were covered here.
Yeah, so when we started our pollinator project, I became aware of an initiative at Channel 4, WDIV, which is our Detroit NBC affiliate. And they have a reporter who literally has created a pollinator beat that she does reports on periodically. We actually started doing reports with her back in 2019, and she actually covered the 2021 pollinator event that we did at our new Fort Street Bridge Park. So this story appeared in June of 21 and was actually the second story that she had done with us. That's not it. Unfortunately, that is not the story.
It's playing through an ad, but
right.
There we go.
There we go.
So you're just seeing
this was
coverage that they provided. Yeah.
Yeah, this was a nice 3-minute long piece that spotlighted our efforts in and also the Pollinator Pledge efforts that we have been doing over the last number of years. And it was a very successful National Pollinator Week activity for us. And there's Ranger Brian.
So we just wanted to point that out, that there are certainly opportunities to leverage this pollinator partnership to support, the overall awareness of your heritage area. We know we all have that issue of that awareness and people completely understanding what it is that we do, and especially this connection with us being, as Sean said, a very industrial minded heritage area, talking about that history, and all of a sudden we're dabbling into something like this work with the pollinators. So, but on to our next major project, Sean.
So this one takes us to Lansing, Michigan. So Lansing, Michigan is 100 or so miles north of Detroit. And this was at the R.E. Olds Museum, which commemorates transportation and the Oldsmobile and the building of those cars in Lansing. And this is where Chris Stein, whose name we've heard several times already today, from the Midwest region, was finally successful in matching us up with the local Rotary people and from there it just took off. And what you see in the picture is a number of those folks from Lansing, from the Rotary, and we've connected with them in a way that has really exponentially increased our abilities to reach other Rotary teams. But this was the first one, and this was in Lansing. So Brian, take it away.
Sure. Yeah. So this is Rotary District 6360. So as Holly was explaining, the Rotary districts being a conduit for this is really that brainchild of Chris Stein. And if I wish he were on here, kind of he's the godfather of this this pollinator work, in the sense that he has a lot of influence coast to coast, and he will make you an offer that you cannot refuse. So Chris's offer was to partner with Rotary, and they happened to be having their district conference in Lansing. And so he made the phone call to see whether we had a location that was willing to accept a Rotary service project. We made, I think, one phone call and we were done with it, which is that the R.E. Transportation Museum in Lansing were very willing to accept it. You see here our very happy Rotary Operation Pollination ambassadors who were there, a handful of dirt ready to go to work. But they were the ones that really pushed the project forward. And so this is the sort of way that you can be hands-on without having to literally get your hands dirty, in the sense that we were able to connect the dots there, but they came in and did all the work. So we were excited to have them on board. There is a video that we're not going to go into here, but there's a video on our website that gets their firsthand account, as well as feedback from the director of the R.E. Museum. So when you have an opportunity, go to our YouTube page or to our Pollination Operation Pollination page and take a look at the video. It'll take you through all of this. It'll give you some feedback from the ladies who helped to put the project together. But this, as Holly explained, was our first opportunity to sign a Operation Pollination joint resolution with the Rotary District. So this is Rotary District 6360 with the district governor in the middle and their district Operation Pollination partner there. And so the garden that is at the R.E. Transportation Museum is actually dubbed, has this, carries this sign for Operation Pollination. And they're looking for new projects as they move forward. So like Sean said, it expanded our opportunities because they saw what we could do there very simply. And we just applied our brain power to other MotorCities National Heritage Area partner sites, museums, and others who have this footprint and could install one of these. And Bob, once again, we had sort of good media opportunities out of this. So,
yeah, in this situation, we have because we have multiple media markets in our national heritage area. I did send out a media advisory, and we did have one TV station that showed up, but we also had the local NPR station, WKAR in East Lansing, came and did they ran an article. I'm guessing that there was a sound component to it, but they didn't include it with their with the story that they put up on their website. But again, pollinators, there's a lot of people that are interested in all the green initiatives. A lot of media outlets have specific reporters that cover these as their beat. And so it's a good opportunity to get to know these folks and use it as an inroad to generate coverage for your national heritage area. Even though it might be a little bit different from your complete mission as a national heritage area, this pollinator initiative certainly is something that has generated a lot of attention.
Okay. Then
So,
our next stop.
oh.
Yeah, go for it.
Me? Okay. So yes, our next stop is Windsor in Ontario, Canada, which you can see looking out the window right here. And believe it or not, is part of the National Heritage Area. There's an affiliate story. It's an international story. Henry Ford had quite a presence in Windsor, Ontario, and they have a section of the city called Ford Town, Ford City. Ford City. And we had an opportunity to go into Ford City beforehand. There's all kinds of gorgeous murals on several buildings about the work, about the Union, about the people who came there, that's been commemorated. So they are an affiliate part of the National Heritage Area, and that means they weren't officially part of the Heritage Area. And we had a period of time when we added geographically and informally affiliated portions around us. So this came up that Windsor, Ontario was going to be the kickoff starting point for the Monarch train. And you'll hear a little bit about what that's all about. And I think Hollywood, and we were talking about it earlier. I don't know if you're going to have the train coming through, but this is Rotary is helping to sponsor this and helping to bring attention to this. And in an effort to make it international, the Rotary had several clubs there, and one from Ohio, a couple from Detroit, Windsor affiliate, and then we were invited as well as the National Heritage Area, which is in the area and also very active in Pollinator Pledge, and we got to sign some additional Pollinator pledges there with several Rotarians.
So you see some of the young people who helped to set some of the monarch butterflies on their path. So the Monarch Express is actually on its way from Canada through the United States and ended up in Mexico, which is the sort of migration pattern of these butterflies. So these young people helped to launch these butterflies on their way. All of them were tagged for tracking. So this is an interesting study in that, but it was a lot of fun. They're launching the butterflies off and seeing which way they were going to go. And like Sean said, here we were joined by 4 other Rotary districts who helped sign the pledge along with Sean representing Motor Cities. And once again, the name of the National Park Service was upheld because all of this was conducted by our fearless leader and supporter, Chris Stein. So as the train pulled off, I said it really should have bared this imagery where you had Chris on his way as we roll down the tracks. So you should be seeing him joining these monarch butterflies. So that is our international story. And we continue to be excited about the work that we're doing with the Pollinator projects because it keeps opening doors to partnerships that we did not expect. And Rotary is one that now having been realized, we realized the potential of where it could go. That discussion that we had that day in Canada and meeting the other Rotary district governors, some of which we actually were already familiar with from other projects, but it turned out, hey, we didn't realize we were crossing over in this way as well. It just shows you the potential that's out there. So thanks for giving us the opportunity to share, and I think we are ready for questions.
Yes, we are. And I really wish Chris Stein was on the call because that was just, yeah, that was great. Okay, so are there any questions or does anyone else have a pollinator story that they would like to share? We have about 15 minutes before we have to wrap up the call. So if anybody has any questions for any of our presenters, you just need to unmute yourself and then you can ask a question.
I have a question then to across the board. How active, Vivian and Holly, were Rotary? So you mentioned not being a member, but how active were they in other projects as you were interacting with them, sort of down through the years? Before we made these connections, were you regularly having Rotary, as members, as partners in projects, as doing anything with your work locally?
Unfortunately, I didn't start with Freedom's Frontier until October of 2020. So I don't have a really good idea of what came before. I do know that there was an attempt to get Pollinator agreements. I am working very closely with them now. It's amazing how many clubs are within districts, and each one of them have very large budgets. I had just recently a Jayhawk group located in Lawrence, Kansas say, hey, you know, we want to work on a garden. Can you point us to one of your partners? And so I find myself being the bridge, and you know, they have quite a bit of money. I mean, they said, you know, a project that's $3,000 or $5,000, all they need is a budget that says exactly what you can do, what supplies are needed, how many volunteer hours. And as long as it's not too distant from the site of where these folks meet, because I know there's 4 clubs in just the small Lawrence, Kansas, where the University of Kansas is located. And when you look at each one of them having thousands of dollars and hundreds of volunteers, it's amazing what we can do, whether or not it's education, it's a garden. Blackjack Battlefield and Nature Park, they now have a very large area that is a pollinator garden, and we want to continue that. And my biggest sometimes challenge is partners that say, well, what does this have to do with civil war or border war? And explaining to it that it is within our themes too, besides the fact that it's being a good person and a good steward. But at the same time, I can tell them that you could do a garden, and in the shape of, if you're doing Civil War, you could do it in the shape of a star representing veterans of that war. You know, there's all kinds of ways that you could make it. Our Watkins Museum of History, they have very small green space, but all around their building is a garden that they've named to a historic figure that was here during Quantrell's raid. So it's called Her Garden. So there's various ways. So trying to convince folks first, but it's amazing the resources that I'm just amazed at the Rotarians and how full of joy they are to get these projects and the volunteers. So the money, the volunteers, and there's so many people that still are a little nervous about COVID, that don't want to go into buildings and museums, but will go outside, are tired of being inside. Even if they don't see it a health risk, it's just they want to go out and experience the outdoors. And this is an easy way for our partners to do that. But that's the only, the challenge I have sometimes is explaining to my partners that there is a connection to our themes.
You can imagine our struggles. So, but with that being said, it actually went pretty smoothly, like we said before. But Vivian, it seems like you were shaking your head when you asked the question about Rotary.
Well, we didn't, prior to the signing of the resolution, which Dan arranged with the Rotary district president, we didn't have any contact with Rotary prior to that. All the projects that we spoke about in my presentation were not directly involving Rotary. There may have been people at some of these gatherings who happened to have a Rotary affiliation, but at that time we didn't even bring that up, so we don't know. They could have been a kind of a unseen contact there. But since then, since the signing of the resolution in July, Dan was invited to give a presentation to the one of the Rotary clubs in Salisbury, Connecticut, and that was at the end of August. And we're now trying to encourage them to reach out to us to make connections with other organizations, since we have so many other contacts in the community. We thought that we could be a resource for them, that they wouldn't need to feel that they had to take on a project on their own, but that they would partner with other community organizations. And I also raised that prospect when I was invited to be a panelist for the Massachusetts Pollinator Network. And that it was a panel discussion on how to help a community group, a community pollinator group in Andover, Massachusetts. That group was just forming, and they had a lot of gardening enthusiasts involved, but they weren't sure about where they could pull a major pollinator project together for the town. And I suggested that they contact their local Rotary Club, and I also put them in touch with the Essex National Heritage Area, which covers their region. So I'm trying to be a pollinator myself in terms of information about both the Rotary as a wonderful resource and also national heritage areas.
Okay, are there any other questions? And if there are, please remember to unmute yourself. That's a common problem.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Vivian.
For Brian and Holly. I really admire your hands-on work with pollinator gardens and in partnering with so many groups, including Rotary. But one of the challenges that we've thought about in doing such projects is ongoing maintenance. How do you arrange that?
Well, that partnership, the strategy is that you launch into it sort of the way that you want it to wrap up. The first example we showed you when we were planting the garden at the park is that we have the Wildlife Habitat Council as well as Marathon Patrolling, which are both physical. Marathon is right next door, but also Habitat Council has this vested interest to make sure that these places are kept. So once planted, they've been the ones to come back and steward it. There's also a nonprofit organization that has maintenance agreement to maintain that park in it. So they had to agree, yeah, we want to accept this garden and move it forward. When we got to the Lansing situation, when we made the call to the director there, it didn't come with that without baggage. When you say, okay, we're going to install this garden, and he had to be aware that irrigation and other things you had to do to keep it up. Ironically, though the Rotary district installed it, the local Rotary Club hasn't taken it on to maintain it. So it has become a thing with the museum, an eye on it. And then the Rotary district still comes down and checks case by case. So I think it's a case by case based on landowners. Really, it's the stewardship of the people who operate it that would drive that. You want them to be on board right away. You don't bring a garden to them. You hope that they will accept that garden and the responsibility with it.
Holly?
Well, and I know projects going forward with talking to the different Rotary clubs, they said that they would maintain them. In terms of the Underground Railroad community garden, it's such a source of pride for the community. I see people out there working all ages. And then I have a commitment from Unified Government, the city of Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte County, to maintain the garden. They've decided to let the land around it go wild, and the pollinator plants that were planted have spread to this open area now, this wild area. And I've seen a lot of bees out there recently. But we're also trying to make that into a national park. The Quindaro Township site received commemorative status in 2019, and so at some point in time we hope that it becomes a national park. It may be hopeful, but there's just so much history right there. But it is, if it's an organization trying to do it on its own, I think it is difficult, because I think so many of our small museums struggle with volunteers. And when I'd say the vast majority of our 300 plus visitable sites are maintained by volunteers exclusively versus paid employees. I don't know if you all experience the same. I mean, they're dedicated people, but they're spread thin. So if it wasn't connected to Rotary, I think the benefit of having it connected all projects to the Rotary is their commitment. They told us that when they put something in, that they'll use their volunteers to maintain.
Thank you both.
All right. Well, I would like to thank everybody for tuning in today. This has been a great call, and we will look forward to seeing you in October. So thank you all for joining us today. Bye.